let's do a quick round of intros, and then we can get into a few specific topics, and then happy to do questions if there are any. Yeah. Shwetank,
sure, thanks. Shwetank, I'm the co-founder of Leo Capital. We invest in global Indian alpha, which we define as the Indian diaspora and founders wanting to build the India advantage. We started in 2018. We had 4 funds under management, primarily investing in the US, and then 1 fund focused purely on Europe.
Hi, Andreas. This founding team is here with a few companies in San Francisco. Product Hunt, some people might know, AngelList from the hall, OnDeck, and a few others. Nowadays, I run a GP fund where I invest globally in very technical markets and fusion.
Yeah, Abhishek, Agarwal, ID is what I go by, which is often easier to go all the time. I have a fund called Appreciate Capital. We basically invest super early stage with a focus in India, but also Indians are everywhere. So we also do like Indian diaspora founders. I shot up between Berlin and India. We're fairly sector agnostic, much more founder driven than thematic, but we invest with a bit of a world positive lens and a gender lens as well. That's what it is.
Hello, my name is Lino, founding partner of Riceberg Ventures. We invest in early stage deep tech companies across the globe. So in India, Europe, and US, with a focus on Indian founders. So that's my connection to India. And across the tech investment space, tech, life sciences, cybersecurity, robotics, and many more sectors. We're on the first one, fundraising here at SuperVenture, and it's going.
Yeah. I think I want to start with one thing where India is often looked at, or has been looked at as a outsourcing sector for bulk of the world. And yes, that's been true for decades. And I think India a lot of companies have done very well. But that's fundamentally changed in the last, I would say, decade or. And I think Shwetank's thesis about global Indian alpha has a lot to they really go deep on how that's changed stuff. So I would love you to try and twist that down as much as you can. But no, sort of tell us how the changes happened and how are you guys think about it?
Yeah, sure. At the risk of putting everyone to sleep, so let's go back to the 60s. That's what was what I call the first wave of Indian software. So that's 1968 was when GCS was founded, and that was really about give us your problems, we put cheaper resources to it. That's been a great wave. A lot of billions of dollars of value created. GCS, Infosys, Wipro, Global Logic. And that wave really, we all thought it peaked in the 80s, we got peaked in the 90s. I would say almost peaked in the 2000s. So you could have invested in the outsourcing wave up to the 2000s and made a significant amount of money and probably still continue to make a significant amount of money. In the 2000s, we would say the second wave of Indian entrepreneurship, software entrepreneurship peak. So that's more like the fast follower model. So Freshworks copying Zen, Zendesk. Similar things, right? So taking the cost arbitrage but adding in layers of productization, but still following the leader rather than being the leader. And I think, as like you mentioned, sort of from the mid 2010s, it's really become the third wave, which is world-class, world-first products. So no more copying, no more just cost arbitrage, pure innovation arbitrage, making sure you're using the massive talent and the ingenuity available to build truly world-class, unique products, whether that's on the software side, on the space, on the devices side, all of that. So that's the third wave of software and innovation of India, and that's what's spreading out at the moment.
I want to jump in because you're investing in deep tech globally. Why India specifically, Indian founders? Like, what's driving that? Obviously, you do see it pan-world.
Yeah, of course. I mean, my 3 partners are Indian, so we have a strong connection towards India. We also spend a lot of time there, and we just think that Indians are creating an alpha within these sectors. But of course, it's not about the whole Indian domestic market per se. So it's not only the India opportunity; it's about the Indian diaspora opportunity, so to say, or Indian talent opportunity.
Fair.
Then, of course, it also depends on the sector. So we can't just say, I invest in India and everything is going to go up.
Yeah.
So for us, it's really about different sectors. Let's say healthcare, energy, for example, is really interesting because India has let's say a lot of potential for some energy cases that are relatively big. And then, of course, also in the space sure is doing a fantastic job in 2003, going up to the moment to the south side of it, right? And has an insane amount of skill there, an insane capital efficiency. So of course there's like different sectors along the line that are specifically interesting for us. Also defense, for example, is really interesting with like an 85 billion budget that the country has, right? So a lot of room for startups to grasp the opportunity there, high there. And then of course, it's just kind of like India is so big. Like it's, I mean, you probably also mentioned this, right? Like basically the rat race that everyone has to go through to really end at the top of the pyramid, basically. Yeah. And that is also connected with like a lot of grit, a lot of, let's say, hard work, and to a certain degree also intelligence. I know if I'm wrong.
It's a little bit of intelligence, not much.
And just betting on these people that are there is probably is for us where we see like a lot of growth now. And of course, like it's easier for us to kind of customize our offering towards this crowd. So that's why we came up with these speeches and
Makes sense.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think as an allocator, one of the key mistakes you make is geographically defining them. So all allocators are really thinking about just one part of the opportunity, which is the domestic transaction and the domestic spend. I think what we're trying to tell you is that there is this other part, the diaspora part, which is not thought of as a separate but accessible opportunity. So the diaspora, just to give some numbers, is 40 million strong. Out of the thousands of unicorns in the US, about 100 of them have Indian-born founders, 10%. Highest incidence after the US. So if there's one message you take away, it's not the India opportunity from the geographic lens. It's a very limiting way to think about India. It's a much bigger talent-led opportunity where the diaspora plays a natural part.
Yeah, but in San Francisco, I think we had this joke that pretty much your CEO is in India, your CFO is. And I think most of my management was Indian. Yeah. Like some of them born in America, like second generation. Yeah. I think the scale is the main thing that people don't realize, because a lot of people in Europe still have mental image of India from the early 2000s. And I think it's like the scale of like how much stuff happening in the quality. Yeah. So like population is the population of Africa. You know, like in one country. Then the other thing that I appreciate about the region is like you mentioned before, the talent. Like ISRO is basically India's NASA, and to get into that you have to usually get into IIT, which is like multiple universities, but the best ones can be from Stanford, but have like a 10th or 20th of the acceptance rate or something like this. And then afterwards usually they go to IIS, which is like another layer of filter, and then the ISRO itself has what's it called in English? A filter system for like new hires, which is also like known to be absolutely ridiculous. And then afterwards you have a job where like everybody in your family like thinks you're a hero, but you earn like 30-40K. So there's like a whole generation of people who are like, I'm gonna start a company. You know, they can come out of that thing. Yeah, you know. And I have a company in Ahmedabad, which is the IIM, the business school there, and one of the best in South Asia. And they have like an office in the best in South Asia. It's actually true, like one of the charts, but like it's spread anyway. And they had an office very close to the ISRO campus that they were hiring from ISRO. And the problem there is like similar to here, like when you hire somebody from such a big company, they have like big projects and they can just like instantly leave, so they stay multiple months like longer. And so what his hires did was like during the day work at ISRO, and in the evening come to the office and just work there. And I remember like the founder picked me up at like 9 p.m. from the train station. I was like, hey, thanks so much. Where are we going for dinner? What are we doing now? We're going back to the office. And we were sitting there until 2 a.m. and then at 2 a.m. we left. And then the next day in the morning, the other thing that I really liked about those guys were they had their team calls while driving with the car to the office, because the traffic is so unpredictable. So they were just like, screw that, you know. But I think that people misunderstand the opportunity of talent, like how hungry people are nowadays, like to actually do stuff here. And if I would ask anybody from the German Space Agency to, like, you know what, I hire you in 2 months, stay until then, come at night and work the night at my place, I don't know what would happen. I think it would end up in a newspaper
or jail. I think
one of the two.
The newspaper's already happened. Let's not try jail. No, but also for context, for those of you who don't know Andreas fully, he's invested in 6 companies that are in India, and I think across his investments from the fund and otherwise, he's got like 18 of his investments have Indian founders. So 6 more, okay. And last year he spent 3 weeks.
Oh, I did like a few. Like, so I last year tried to actually take proper time for an India trip instead of like woof, you know. So I did like multiple weeks, and I did like a trip to like where like I knew I had like ex-coworkers and friends. And one thing that freaked me out is that like people there are really, really eager to do stuff. So I was telling people, hey, I do a dinner there. Who wants to come? Like 100 people. And I don't think the shit out. So it's absolutely like it's crazy. Yeah, I don't know how to express this, but it's also like the other thing is like people here. Like for me, I used to work at like San Francisco companies. I did a special thing in our places like we were working very much remote, which wasn't in San Francisco a big thing back then. And so I regularly hired from India. Like for me, it was the ultimate hiring hack. Back then, nowadays it was very back then just to know IIT. Yeah. Because most American recruiters don't know university because they only know their ones, you know. And the level of quality of engineering you usually get is insane. I think people don't realize the scale.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the scale, right? I mean, just to give context, India, like Shwetank said, like you can't look at it as one piece, and also like within India, but even within India, there is what the venture ecosystem of India 1, India 2, India 3. India 1 is driving a lot of consumption to British people. That alone has about 30 million households, 150 million people. Per capita income is easily about $43,000, right?
It's Mexico.
Yeah, ballpark. And this consumption class is what's driving it massively. And what we've seen, let's say, over the last couple of years is that it's not as much about the number of people increasing in the sort of India 1, but it's just a lot of these people are just spending a lot more. So there's massive sort of depth happening. I think the widening is happening slowly, but that's from a casual perspective. And just to give you an example of the scale, so there's something in India called UPI. I don't know if you know of it, but it's basically unified payments interface. It's pretty revolutionary from a financial transaction perspective. Essentially, what it does is I can scan this QR code, whatever amount of money I can transfer to him instantly. This works seamlessly across bank accounts, blah blah blah. It's also completely free. Right? Like we don't pay a cent to do this. UPI got to $500 billion in volume in 4 years. PayPal took 20 years to get that. Right? So that's just sort of the speed of. But he's also talking about people like eager to do shit. It's not just about come to dinner with.
I think it's like a quarter of Visa's transactions.
Yeah.
Or something like this.
Yeah.
So and the other crazy thing for them, like to put this in comparison, like I work a lot with the European Commission on like group stuff, different discussion, and who here knows like UPI and DPI, like this kind of stuff, and so. Okay. So for quick explaining, DPI is digital public infrastructure, so basically the idea of using software for governance. And it's not just UPI, it's like ID, so like KYC, who are you, all this kind of stuff, and payments and wallets. If anybody here looked at the European e-wallet project, yeah. And then it continues. And one thing that you have now is like they have stuff like ONDC, which is basically decentralized marketplaces, so like think Uber. Or they have OCEM, which is basically decentralized lending. So, and the powerful thing that happens in India with this kind of stuff is Commission try to establish standards for Europe, and what they do to solve problems is actually like even a step further into productization, and that's the really interesting thing, like the DPI stuff. It's not just the fact how many years ago, it's the fact that they cannot solve rural poverty through a lending marketplaces only within India. Yeah, people can just buy asset classes and like give money to the countryside and make money doing that. And that's a completely like market-based solution to that very, very big problem at the money flow. And to put this in another context, for them to roll this out globally would be a 4x scale.
they're already launching in, like, for example, UK works in France, works in Brazil, so tech has been, I mean, if you want to, let me go back to use a word which we're no longer using. That tech has been outsourced to so many countries because they just haven't been able to make it, and that's what our innovation has. Like, to go back to Shwetank, so it's not just sort of, you're not outsourcing services, but actually innovation product. Yeah, I think I want to try and not go too long, but I'm gonna do as perhaps if there are any questions, but before that is why don't you guys let's do one quick thing that what do we know from our time in India, investing in India, journeys in India that we think the world doesn't. Sorry. Perhaps the hard one, sort of putting on the spot. And if you know it, don't make people look bad. Hold your horses. Slap in any place. Yeah, slap in any place. But yeah, like what's one thing you think most people in the room may not really know? Shwetank, you wanna?
I mean, at the highest level, whatever you say about India, the opposite is also true. And that's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, elaborate because
Yeah, I love Shwetank's non-answer. Are you a VC by any chance?
I just that it's the old Dickens novel, right? It's the best of times, the worst of times. So what I'm trying to say is don't go with one. There's no one unique point of view that works for you. You have to be comfortable with multitudes. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity at a very basic level. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity if you're going to be investing in building.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a contradiction of the quality. There is, like, for example, the classic one is found in India. It's also possible to raise a pre-seed, and then if you raise a pre-seed, the seed round comes for free. And seed rounds in Series A tend to be like as expensive as Series A, like very frequently, but more expensive. Everything is all of a sudden like overvalued. The public market is insanely overvalued, but also it's like there's a quote like India disappoints something like this, like the people who really believe in it always disappoint the people who don't.
Yeah.
There's like a famous quote which I know. But basically like it's the same end. It's kind of like completely overhyped and completely underhyped. And this is like such a bizarre truth because both is true. Like I have met some of the best founders in my whole career in India, and I have met some of the weirdest people trying to fraud me in India. Not back to back, but like what? Like I had a guy pitching me a space thing, and it was like, yeah, we have Digantara as like customer, blah blah. And like cool. And I called like the CEO, like, is this true? Like, no, we're talking with you, but he said you're already committed. I was like, okay. And then I'm like, look further, like basically the whole company, everything tells me, all the numbers, everything falls apart. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, do you expect that like people don't call each other or like maybe like white skin, maybe I don't know. Like, what the fuck, And that's like a casual level of fraud. I can tell you like crazy stories which are legal cases. But anyway, and then also I meet founders in India who are easily the best founders I've ever worked with. Like easily, like top 1%.
Yeah.
And that's in the same, let's say, town. Like,
Yeah.
It's in the same bucket that people use. Yeah. Which freaks me out.
You didn't steal his answer though.
You let me do your work.
I was like, I'm gonna let Andreas finish. What?
Yeah. I had a few days ago a call with like people organizing like an impact investing.
That's fun.
Yeah, an impact investing event, and they basically tried to get me to speak there. And apparently, the stuff I do about Europe is a little bit too intense for them because I talk about economic doom and like last chance and this kind of stuff. So they were like, you also do like the speaker after me was doing like gardening for little kids to learn about food, and it was like you kill the mood. Don't you want to talk about your investments in South Africa or India? Like, what are you doing there? Like, how are you trying to really is crazy for that, like impact something?
Like help the underprivileged.
Underprivileged, like I invest in satellite companies in India. Like what the fuck? And I genuinely believe this was racist. Like the whole POV of that was like it's a like third world country, I guess.
Yeah.
So like what are you doing to help them? I'm like, no, I'm happy to invest.
Yeah. I'll let that one be a
Thank you.
Yeah, pun intended. You want to go next?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think a lot of people are deterred of like even investing in India or like looking into the market. And for sure, like for some reasons that's true, right? Like as you just mentioned, but I think it's just like very important to like really be committed towards the region, towards the culture and the country to like really go there and grasp the opportunity by its hands. And like because it's not just like about startups, it's not just about let's say the food and spirituality, it's just like way broader. And I think it's not too late, is what I want to say. I mean, the stock market, etc. Maybe you have to wait a bit, but like with like a deep dive into the whole like ecosystem, you like talking to the right people, connecting with the right people. I think it's still possible to like really be active in the ecosystem. Because when I was in India like 1 or 2 years ago, went to conferences and I was still the only non-Indian person there, and I was like, okay, so. Am I really the first one like seeing the opportunity? Probably not. But it's still like probably coming back to stay. Like in the West, like not many people are interested in the whole medium topic on a total scale, right? But like there's still like a lot of interest there. And then on the other side, like when you look at India, it's 1.4 billion people, meaning 1.4 billion consumer and customers. But it also means there's like probably millions of founders that are looking out there for opportunities, for problems to solve. And like 2 years ago, like it was just kind of like a funny thought, like seeing Apple picking up like really crazy here in Europe, right? It's not venture related, but like I thought it's an interesting thing. Went to India, didn't see like any kind of report. And then of course I thought, why not open up a talent point here or like a whole company around it? Not for myself, but just kind of like talked to a bunch of people who said like, yeah, no, it's not really the culture of tennis, etc. Even though like squash and badminton is pretty big. A year later, I landed in Bangalore and I see on the billboard a big ad about tennis. I was like, shit, it's too late. Even though it's still probably not too late because the market is so big, there's still so many people. So I think it's if you're interested in doing something in India, it's not too late. You really have to move fast, which is also really
this resonates a little bit. One thing is like basically at my age, like a few generations before, their older brother had to go to the UK to the US to make a career, and now usually the youngest brother wants to stay in India to start a company there. And I talk to so many people that have no idea what their companies are going to be about, but they want to start one because they're so convinced that they just want to have a slice of the pie. And you couldn't, like I know people moving back to India, which is, so it's like there is something definitely there.
I'm going to try not to do the confidence sheet because I had one data point I was going to throw on that front. I think one of the things I've seen, is just how building a startup has become one of the best done in India is doing. So, now I'm not trying to brag, but as Andreas said, I am the bug, which is pretty much the best B school in India, and we have some other alumni here as well. Yeah, he did. So, just saying. But no, like for example, when I graduated in 2010, I think the go-to for top was 1% or whatever the top of the class was the typical MVP consulting stuff, the investment banking or like banking on the trading side and those kind of things, or private equity hedge fund. Now, the best of the class is almost universally winning company, and they often this is to your priority that Andreas was talking about the LP colleges. These are folks, because I had to pick a bunch of them, around third. It's a 4-year course. Around third year, even like a year and a half after they graduate, hey, we want to come to an internship, with one of our portfolio companies or with us or something or the other. They're already working on something, like a year and a half before they graduate, and this is pretty much the best talent in definitely India, likely in Southeast Asia, very much likely also in the world. And these folks are like hustling from that ground up. I've seen that change happen literally from when I graduated to now. It's nothing short of ridiculous.
I can make an example for this. I forgot the name, but it's a very famous dating matchmaking site where you can also pay ads to have your profile on certain search terms. And it used to be, I forgot what the bank banking or something. And nowadays, the top paid term is startup founder. Pretty awesome.
Yeah. No, I think that's it from us. If anyone has questions, happy to sort of do that to any one of us. Otherwise, we can go back to some beer wine, which is outside, and some softs and chips. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Sorry for the
If anybody wants to beat Max, you try to like send him that way after the event.
But after the question.
Yeah.
Just for a question, you know me a bit, but to quick intro, I used to work for a family office here in Berlin like a couple of months ago to build a fund of funds for India because last year I actually spoke to about 30 funds in India and very few of them had Europeans in the cap table, none had a German, and it was like, what the fuck? And do you have any idea why that is, why people are still so hesitant? Because I feel like by now, the fact that we have this event here is kind of, it's due to you, of course, but it shows interest is rising a bit. People are waking up a bit, but so slowly. I mean, it's a kind of a German thing.
Also, the slow part is hardly any allocation in Europe to venture. And when there's hardly any allocation to venture, how will there be allocation needed? So,
It's two definitely.
There's like one reason is this, so like there is not enough capital from pension funds in Europe, like percentage-wise, like it's a fraction of the US. There's like sometimes regulations they're not allowed to, and so on and so on. That's one. It's very uncommon for family offices to do VC, all this kind of stuff that you know. So that's a definite one. And the other one is also a little bit mindset around a lot of things. So for example, if you have funding from the EF fund, like the European Investment Fund, you basically have geos and like amounts of money you're allowed to invest in other geos. So if at the moment you get government money in Europe, it's a VC fund, you can no longer say like, let's try get like the best companies to world invest and like use more Sequoia normally doing, you know, because that will sort of possible. You have to list per region. So by default, for many of them, it's just not interesting to do it. Like the VC fund to invest in India, like these relationships. Usually what we need is we need first the VC funds to have this relationship for family offices like we're supposed to.
So we ended up setting the shop in Europe because of this issue. So if you have limited capital from global investors, it's hard to deploy in Europe. So and the Europeans can't go deploy outside. So to take money from EIF, etc., we ended up setting up a Europe fund that deploys in Europe so that we're building up that. So it's a very structured.
Just to give you an example of also like the nightmare for managers, right? Last year, SuperVenture met, I'm going to name the fund, but a principal had a fund, like very senior principal. That fund does deep tech Europe only across Europe. His personal portfolio of his personal wealth, all of his public market exposure, 50% was India. Right? And that is not, and his fund hasn't touched India. It's a fund that's been around, like it's not a small fund, it's like 300 million in AUM. Not a single deal they've done in India. And he's like, yeah, I want to, but just we can't. Or unpack or XYZ just doesn't allow it. So I think that's a challenge, and I think what you said in the beginning is just it's 2 degrees of separation away from comfort. I think Europeans have money through entrepreneurship. I mean, don't hold this against me, but in like even back a few hundred years, it was entrepreneurship in whatever ways it was dark. But that's how they made money. But I think for the last, let's say, 100 years, they haven't made money in tech entrepreneurship, right? So whether you want to call it Mittelstand in Germany or something else somewhere, that discovered those in tech at some level. Yeah, sorry, Julia.
Yeah, I have an extension to that question because even on the market side, it's not happening.
Yeah.
Like you all know that I do market expansion into India.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest hurdles is European investors preventing companies from looking at this market because it's too risky. Why would you do that? Do you know this? You don't have the skill set, blah, blah, blah.
But I think ultimately,
that would be the lower hanging fruit even for the investment team in Europe if they don't want to immediately invest in Indian partners or in India.
Compared with the probably right, India's a tough market.
Yes.
sorry.
But also high reward. So
Yeah.
It makes sense for them to give money to VC funds. I'm completely unbiased in saying that. Sorry, yeah.
Hi, I'm Stefan. I have a quick question about AI. Like, it feels like I only hear about the US and China doing leading edge stuff.
Yeah.
I'm curious, why do I not hear about companies in India doing stuff like that? Maybe I just didn't hear about it.
Because they're doing it in the US.
Yeah.
Complexity, cursor,
All
they're all
Indian founders.
Indian origin founders, great in the US.
A lot of them born in India, like, not necessarily second there. I think, but also like,
But why would it not be a
I think one is, in my sense, it's sometimes especially with AI, like what we see right now, because it's a hype cycle, and let's all pray the hype cycle doesn't completely go bust crazily. So as has happened, as has happened in the past every single time, but this time different. It's not,
Capital formation in the US is much easier.
I think the depth of capital that you need for that kind of stuff that people are raising
It's the same actually in Europe. Like many of the European AI companies are actually trading in Canada because like the cost for the data science is lower and this kind of stuff. So it's like turns all the way down. But it's like cost thing.
But so, for example, some of the AI work I've seen in India, there are people, for example, working on globally the world is massively ignoring Indic languages, right? So now we actually, this is a pretty fun portfolio company of mine, but they, for example, they've done a bunch of foundational work around speech AI and audio stuff on Indic languages because they're like, this is going to be massive, and it is ignored, and there's an opportunity there. So I think there are companies. There's a founder called Paras. He bootstrapped his company called Bigify, and he sold it to a private equity company for like 200 million. And actually, he only sold his stake, so the company's worth completely more. And he's now sort of this residency where he's kind of getting scientists, engineers to come build stuff in AI, and it's called Lost Fund, if anyone's curious. But they're doing he's actually supporting a bunch of stuff. They've published papers that have come up in international journals and peer review stuff. So there is work happening. I think also, not to take this the wrong way, but I think Indians aren't necessarily always the best at really talking about the incredible work they've done. Right. I think, you have certain people in the world who will be able to do X and sort of speak a 10x game, and but Indians aren't usually sort of the best at that. Yeah. Sorry, long answer to that. Sorry, I was first.
For Andreas, so investing is relative. You've been in the US, you're investing in Europe, and you're going to India because you find it fascinating from opportunity point of view, right? And you do hard tech, which is what I do. Why? Like you mentioned, why India, etc. But relatively, why would you want to look at Indian opportunities? Because of the market, or why not focus in certain geographies which you know best? Or is there a gap in certain geographies where you are, which is what is making you go to India?
So don't take any advice on how to structure the seed portfolio of fund for me. I think the stuff I do works for me, and I don't know. I wouldn't follow it. I wouldn't recommend my strategy to anybody else. With Fund 1 and 2, Fund 1 was very much around the idea that people are sleeping around global opportunity, around global work, essentially. Fund 2 was the same idea, but focusing very much on hardware. And there is a lot of for example, I don't do space tech in Europe. I wouldn't touch it. Funding through ESA is it's a hurdle, very complex regulation in every country. There's basically not supposed to be launchers. It's very academia centric, very research centric, commercial, and so on and so on. Insane amounts of years until you actually have something in the market. I like investing in space tech in India because from the very beginning, since they started very commercial, reaching for agriculture, this kind of stuff, it's very much government supported. They're trying to build hubs. I'm about in Bangalore. They have their own launchers and put money behind it. They're working very tightly with ISO and ISO and all these kind of different shell organizations to kind of make this work for startups. They have things where they launch a rocket and then part of the booster just has prototypes of startups on it while in space and falling down so they can try out stuff cheaply, And there's a lot of stuff happening that's specific to that region, I invest in video AI models in San Francisco, and that video AI you could also invest in Zurich hearing, but you can't invest that in India. Right. Does it make sense? So it very much depends on which technology and why does a certain hardware region have an unfair advantage or something, and that makes it interesting.
I think this view on venture being a local business also comes from the start of venture. People didn't live as many places that Andreas, myself, you would live. So local has become a lot very different for all of us and what it meant to Don Valentine when he started Sequoia in 1960.
I've lived in India all my life.
So that's that when people who haven't then end up with very interesting networks in different parts of the world, which then it feels differently local and you can see the different plays happening around, so you can become an. I know Alex is in the audience as well, who's made a name in geographic arbitrage. So you can talk to him about how he does that later on. Sorry to just call you out there.
Yeah. Any others, or should we head to the energy drinks?
Awesome. I have a controversial take to